Well, thanks everyone for being here today. Welcome to the Shaping the Future of Media, Entertainment, and Culture. I'm Kirsten Stewart. I head up the media platform here at WEF, and I am joined today by my esteemed panelists. To my far left, you'll recognize David Kenny, the Chief Executive Officer at Nielsen, and David also serves as our board chair for our Media, Entertainment, and Culture governors. To his right, Linda Yaccarino. Linda is the Chairman, Advertising and Partnerships at NBC Universal, and she also sits on the steering committee of our Media Governors Board. And to my immediate left is Mark Pritchard, the Chief Brand Officer, Procter & Gamble. Mark actually introduced to our platform the GARM, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media Initiative, and we're going to be probably talking a bit more about that this afternoon. So thanks to all of you in the room. Thanks to those of you who are tuning in via live stream. We're going to spend the next half hour addressing an overview of the future of media. We're going to have the benefit of, obviously, the perspectives of these three great expert panelists who come from three very different media groups. And we're also going to get into a deeper dive of some of the emerging challenges and opportunities that are happening right now in the future of media. We're going to look at how the media system is responding and preparing for the future where constant disruption and reinvention is actually the norm. So to connect this to the broader conversations that are happening at Davos this week, we have an opportunity here today not just to examine the future of media with regards to the media industry itself, but the fact that the media industry has found itself going through what we call at the Forum the Fourth Industrial Revolution, probably before most other industries have. There's some lessons here to be learned, I think, again, from these experts as they have led companies through this transformative time. They really are applicable to all industries. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to the panelists. I'm going to actually start. This has been a very disruptive time. We have gone through a lot of change. That change has sometimes been beneficial. When you think about the ride that we've been on, there's been some real benefits. The way that we get content into the hands of consumers today, whether they're creating it, whether they're consuming it, we can actually deliver better on the promise of getting people what they want, when they want it. But there's a flip side, isn't there? Like there's this other side, there's an industry and ecosystem that's been shaken by these changing and disappearing business models. There's a weakening of the system, and in the value in media, it's actually been left a bit vulnerable to the rise of things like disinformation, ad fraud, or just bad content. So starting off at the top and kind of stripping it all back and getting to the heart of the matter and the overall health of this media ecosystem and where we can go next, I thought I'd turn to you, Mark and Linda, particularly about you are leaders not just in businesses but through an entire group of industries who are going through massive systemic change. And Mark, I'll start with you. How do you lead through disruption?
Well, the best way to deal with disruption is to lead it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we try to do is to lead disruption, but do it in a constructive way that will build value for consumers, but also value for overall markets. Because when that happens, then everybody benefits. And there's plenty of disruptions that have happened that have been destructive. Mm-hmm. So it's really incumbent upon us and all of our partners to disrupt in a constructive way. What we've done is tried to deal with a lot of the big changes, for example, data and digital technology, where we brought our own first-party data and created our own database, obviously in a privacy-compliant way where we're very respectful for asking consumers permission. That has then allowed us to reinvent our entire brand-building ecosystem. Right. We've just pretty much started over in the last 5 years. Yeah. So we've reinvented media to go from mass blasting, which had enormous amounts of waste, to mass reach, because we still need to reach a lot of people, but do it with one-to-one precision. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of that through programmatic media, for example, which allows you to reach people and then cap an ad, cap frequency, so you don't keep reaching them over and over and over again. It makes a better experience for consumers, and it saves money. We've reinvented advertising. One of the great things about the digital revolution is that it's really created all sorts of opportunities for reinventing advertising. So you can go away from just annoying ads that are interruptive to really useful, entertaining, and interesting ads, or even experiences that people really want to watch. Yeah, so, that's the kind of stuff that we're working on. We're very excited about the over-the-top platform because we think that brings an entirely new opportunity. But it's also changed our partnership ecosystem. So we now decide what we need to work on versus what another supplier should work on.
Right.
We have partnerships, greater partnerships with the likes of the Nielsen's and NBCU's, but also Katie Couric Media, Queen Latifah, Tribeca, other partners where we can create content together that will allow us to be able to engage consumers. And that's given us an entirely new treasure trove of creativity. So I would say the best way to deal with disruption is to lead it yourself.
Right.
Get out in front of it.
Right. And Linda, when you look at NBC Universal and what you've done there in terms of, you are leading a traditional media organization for all intents and purposes, but one that has reinvented itself to not be so traditional anymore.
I'm relieved that you said it's
So-
not be so traditional anymore. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. But I think to Mark's point, when he specifically says you want to lead it instead of being led by it, and in terms of leaning in and leading that transformation, there's a lot of comfort that comes with that reflects, again, to another one of Mark's points about reflecting the values of your company. So for us, it's all about meeting up with the consumer behavior that, quite frankly, all three of us lead on behalf of our companies, that the business practices in media and entertainment have not kept up with consumers' behavior. So when you tackle disruption in your big companies, and we all lead big companies, you have to think about what those values are. For us, the first thing that comes is safety. And in a world where there's new data regulation, that in the US, when you talk about CCPA, but data and protection, along at NBCU, high priority transparency, because our company can't get off first base with either one of my partners on this stage if we are not really dedicated to continuing a fully transparent, open platform on behalf of our customers. So when we're able to do that transformation in leading NBC, what was once known as a legacy media company, to a media company of the future, if you were to create it today, that's with a creation of our one platform that we announced last week, or was it last week, 2 weeks ago at CES? When the heck was CES? But now that we're here, giving an example or a mechanism for our partners to actually transact in an open platform way that reflects the consumption of our media on every screen in near real time. And I think what we'll talk about is, historically, we would do it in an exclusive way, and I would take a trip to Cincinnati and say, hey, I have this new thing, I'd love for you to buy it, or hey, I have this new thing, I'd love for you to help us measure it. But it's all working together to develop it today in a partnership that we're able to serve our consumers together.
Yeah, and kind of broadening, your view. I think, David, when you look at the work that you're doing at Nielsen and how content nowadays no longer has a geographical barrier, it really does travel. What do you see as some of the challenges as we go ahead at looking at the transformation of the industry?
I love the concept of partnership, but at the end, money has to trade hands.
Right.
And certainly what we provide is the currency, so that you can measure what the value was and provide it back. And it's actually important that that currency cover the whole market, because Linda needs to yield manage everything she has. Mark needs to actually make priorities. So measuring everything is key, and that's a hard challenge because everything keeps growing, number one. And number two, it keeps growing globally. So you also need to be able to do this on a more global basis, which are two big challenges. I'd say, in addition, there's a couple things that are important in that measurement of everything, which is the mix of, the consumer has more control between free ad-sponsored content and subscription content, and you have to actually look at it all. So 2/3 of all people get their news, some of their news, from subscription. The people who pay subscriptions value it more, they think the quality's higher, they trust it, but again, then that content becomes important to brands who are trying to build trust. So figuring out the mix of those models is key. And the whole industry isn't as forward. So the front runners, like these two companies, make a lot of progress, but getting everybody to that standard, getting the industry bodies working together. Mark's done a great job in his other job of running the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, to get them together. In certain countries, the governments are really not current on how this works. So I think a lot of what we need to do is build partnerships between individuals, but also build industry movement.
Right.
Because the industry falls to the lowest common denominator, and the industry is holding back some of the innovation.
And you're running global companies, and when you look at where your footprint is, what are you most excited about? Like, I know, Mark, you've talked a lot about China in the conversations I've seen you have on other stages. When you look out to China, what do you see there that's interesting to you?
I think if you want to see the future, go to China.
Right.
Because China is just extremely advanced when it comes to what the world will look like in a few years. A few years ago, it was almost all broadcast TV, flipped over to almost all digital. The influencer ecosystem has exploded in China. E-commerce is huge with the Alibabas and Jingdongs of the world and WeChats. And then they've also done a lot of what we talked about before about partnerships of new content creation that engage people. So in China, for us at least, we have about 80% of our media is in some form of digital, and 80% of that is bought automatically through some kind of a programmatic means.
Right.
So that's part of the way that we're helping create value. And I think they're going to continue to grow in terms of the creativity and the innovations that we're going to be seeing.
And what does that mean for you, Linda, when you look at your workforce in particular, like the fact that the work you do has to be global, the work
Has
is
to be
incredibly
global and
automated?
Historically, NBC Universal, being the largest media company in the U.S., has been looked at as just that, the largest media company in the U.S. But about a year ago, we purchased Sky. So there's been an opportunity for us to expand globally. And with several other partnerships that we have that cross borders, we are now quite a formidable offering when it comes to premium content. And I bring that up because for the first time, a global offering that I can talk on behalf of all the content that we are able to broadcast or distribute or globally now. Historically, there's been a trade-off, right? A trade-off on the caliber of content for advertisers. So there hasn't been a real unified, soon-to-be automated mechanism for global marketers like Procter & Gamble and Mark's team to be able to trade globally at the scale that premium content delivers now with NBCU plus Sky. It's quite an interesting notion to say now that we have that offering versus what was a value exchange or a trade-off with the tech platforms, where the premium content, which opens up a whole nother series of issues as it pertains to brand safety, and that's just not something that we luckily have to contend with at NBC Universal. So it's quite an exciting time for the global expansion of our company.
Yeah, and when you look at brands, deciding to expand with their name being the lead, and the opportunities then there are to distribute this content worldwide, what is the consumer feeling like when David, they open up their phone or they open up their computer and they have a million different apps, and they can get all these different streaming services and content.
Well, they're not using most of the apps, so
So what does it look like?
They tend to pick favorites, so it's a very small number. I think there is enthusiasm for curation. I think what Linda's company did with Peacock is we'll see the reaction, but I think the consumer has been looking for quality and curation and a bit of trust because there's been a cacophony. Number one, I think secondly. The consumer's looking for more discovery. We certainly see some algorithm fatigue in that it's feeding up the same thing over and over. And I think everybody's been working on their algorithms. So the whole discovery process, I think, is beginning to be upgraded. And where we see people making progress in teeing up new content, consumers are eating it up.
And when you look at consumers, what are you thinking of? I'm just leaving it open to both you and Linda in terms of.
Do you want to take first?
Well, one of the things that we are thinking about is just remember in 2000 when we had the internet bubble, we could face a content bubble here pretty quickly. And I think what's going to have to reign is going to have to be high quality and high trust. And that is going to be absolutely necessary because consumers are looking for great quality, they're looking for great content, they're looking for something that's useful, and they're absolutely looking for something that they can trust. So those companies that can provide that trust, that can provide that quality, I think are going to be the ones that reign. We tend to go wherever consumers go. Consumers went to newspapers in 1898. We went there. They went to radio in 1920. We went there. They went to TV in the 1950s. We went there. We'll go wherever they're going.
Yeah.
And what we just need to do is find a way to engage. And I think that's why it's so important now, with all the content, with all the connectivity, with all the technology. It's so important for partners now, for companies to really partner and collaborate and figure out the best way to get the best offering to the consumer. Otherwise, we will have a bubble, and that won't be good for anybody.
And I think just to add to Mark's comments, when we talk about the high quality and the need for trust and a potential content bubble, it's really, really interesting because as there has been, now with all the apps or infinite choice that the consumer has to get any type of content, and there's such a spectrum of quality of that content, it is the reason when we look at whether it is the fragmentation of choice or what is coming to be subscription fatigue with all the SVOD opportunities, it is completely the reason that has fueled the enthusiasm at NBC Universal for the launch of Peacock, which is our new OTT streaming service that will have advertising. But because we're bringing it to the marketplace and we can throw out that old legacy playbook, we have a brand new platform that will be technologically sophisticated, but it's new. So we don't have to worry about tearing anything down of legacy linear television norms, which in the US is an unbelievable amount of ads from 10 to 15 minutes or so per hour. I know, shocking. But now with Peacock, you'll have 5 minutes or less per hour that will be sponsored and obviously ad targeted and personalized, so the viewer doesn't experience ad nauseum the same ad over and over. You know it, right? And it follows you around and you're like, I already purchased that item, stop finding me. So we'll be able to control that, but in a direct way that premium content has never been able before to have that direct conversation with the consumer. So it's the whole reason, hopefully, controlling that subscription fatigue and controlling the wallet, where if I'm able to get as few as possible, but the right ad, I actually enjoy that relationship more than paying with no ads. And in a world, I think if you read a lot of the economic surveys that came out this week talking about concern for economic stability, consumer confidence, trust, it's fueling our enthusiasm at our company for a platform that's ad-supported that gives always premium content at scale.
If I can add on Linda's point, if we can create a new supply chain that is both responsible, high quality, then we can really make a big difference. Ad nauseum is a great description. 7 out of 10 people say they're annoyed by ads. And that's because they keep getting the same ad over and over and over again, or they get followed, or whatever the case may be. So if we can build that in, it's actually a good thing to have only 5 minutes of advertising than 15 to 17 minutes of advertising. So I think that's part of where we have to start really working together to figure out how to create these new ecosystems that'll make it a better experience for the consumer, not a better experience for advertisers and other platforms.
But for people who are new to the industry, the other thing I wouldn't want people to miss is consumers love media. Every year, including 2019, the amount of minutes per consumer watching video increased again. So television is at all-time high. It's just in different forms. When you can carry it around with you, when you can find minutes between things, when you can use your commute, people fill their time with, they can't get enough. So sometimes I think the only competitive media is sleep. It's clearly not work, because people are consuming media at work. Just when you look at the hours, but people love it.
At our jobs, we say we're working.
And maybe let's talk a little bit about that content that people are consuming, because the interesting thing about the benefits of all of this new technology and the new pathways of getting content, there is that algorithmic element, which means that unfortunately the way that certain platforms initially constructed themselves, the business model was really favoring certain kinds of content that weren't necessarily the best forms of content. And we ended up with a bit of an upended system where you couldn't necessarily find good content. And I think there's developed now this lack of trust now between consumers of content and those that make it and those that distribute it. When you look at trust, and I think, Mark, of the work that you're doing under GARM, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, I think there's been a lot of people are fed up with at this point the conversation about how do we make sure that we create safe spaces in digital, and how we make sure that good content thrives. You know, we all agree that needs to be the end result. But instead of just talking about it, what do we actually do about it? And is that something that you've pulled together in GARM?
Yeah, well, but what GARM is, it's called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, which is focusing on ensuring that we build a responsible media supply chain for the future. If you think about what happened in the digital world for the past 20 years, we didn't see around the corners well enough to see what were going to be the negative effects of user-generated content and social media. And so what GARM is doing is, first, number one, is clean it up and working together. There's 39 different advertisers, there's 7 agency companies, 6 platforms, and 5 trade associations that are coming together to clean it up. There's still, as much as we've seen estimates of 600 million pieces of harmful and toxic content online every 3 months. Most of that is taken off, but there's still 5% of that's staying on. So number one, what we're doing is we're agreeing on what are the standards of content quality. Now, what we're proposing is, why don't we use the standards that we've been using for the last 50 years in TV? Those are probably pretty good.
Worked, yeah.
They worked.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just adopt those. Then what we'll need is technology, which needs to be able to eradicate this content when it comes up. Or if it comes up, you don't allow people to see it, or enough people to see it. And at minimum, you don't allow it to be monetized. Because if it's monetized by advertising, largely a lot of that content that's created is created by bad actors.
Right.
And they're then using advertising to fuel their nefarious activities. So the last thing you want is that to be monetized. So we need to get systems for that. Then we want to have tracking systems, because we need accountability. The beautiful thing is we have accountability. And when we have accountability, then that allows you to go back and make sure that you can address things. And then working together across the entire ecosystem, just as you do with anything, when you have bad activity, what you can have is systems where you can warn each other that something coming, so you can cut it off. So that's what this alliance is about, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to make some headway on it.
But I do think it's incumbent on the industry to want it to be open and transparent.
Right.
The flip side of some of the privacy rules is there's a tendency to keep all the data inside platforms, and this will never work if all of those players don't see the data transparently. And I think there's some tricky business model questions in that, and I think there's some ways to solve it, but none of us should accept answers that aren't transparent, because even well-intentioned actors are never as good as fully transparent systems.
And if I could add to that, and when we get back to, we've had some really good systems in place that have worked so well in television, but it's not just for the content that we create, because you wouldn't see a piece of content that is harmful or detrimental in linear television, because we have standards and practices that don't allow that. But also what it doesn't allow is bad advertising, so the bad actors that exist in advertisers. So in television, we're able to also protect the consumer, because we have the ability to say, no, we don't make that type of content, we don't want to be, but we also will not take any of those ads that have caused harm and have plagued the tech platforms for a really long time. So I think to your point, it goes even beyond just the content we develop, it's the advertising that we accept, and we take responsibility for that. So I think that's one thing. And then another thing, I think Mark is being a little modest, and he's only talking about GARM, but one of the things that we've also worked really strongly together about, not only to spread I think the word about responsible content, but also about what does it look like, and how do we make that content? What does it look like to the consumer from the people who are in front of the camera and behind the camera? And one thing that Mark and I have worked very proudly on is an initiative called See Her that is really focused on gender equality and the portrayal of women in media. And basically you could see, if you can see her, you could be her. And Mark always likes to swing for the fences. So it was no short order within about 6 weeks' time that during the last Olympics that we launched the See Her initiative across all of NBC Universal live during the last Olympics that we had. So we felt it was really important, and we say all the time that if NBC Universal, the largest media company in Procter & Gamble, the largest advertiser, can get it right, then so goes the whole industry. And we take that responsibility of our partnership very seriously. And it's one of the things that you'll also see a continuing effort across all screens to partner on initiatives like that. So not only is it important to our consumers, and it's reflected in our business performance, we know that, but also inspirational for many, many other companies and partners across the industry.
Well, and what we're trying to do on the inclusive is make sure they become standardized in the metrics. So making sure so we're now measuring women equality in sports. In the panels, making sure that we have full representation of same-sex households has changed the acceptance of LGBTQ content. Making sure we've got adequate representation of every race in every country helps get beyond racism, which exists in a lot of nations in different ways. I think it's really important these open, transparent systems also account for everybody.
I think it's one of the futures of media, entertainment, and culture, in that because entertainment, culture, images that are portrayed affect popular culture. They affect how people see the world. So just the industry is coming together to ensure the accurate representation of women and girls, but also of race and ethnicity and sexual and gender identity and ability and religion and age. Because when that happens, then diversity and inclusion becomes a norm. Pivoting back on one other thing, I wanted to come back to David's point around transparency across the platforms. That is absolutely crucial, particularly as privacy becomes a bigger issue. It's going to be requiring now all companies, and I mean all companies across tech platforms, across the networks, across every company, to have transparency across so we can get the signals to help us, one, eradicate bad content, two, make the ad experience a lot better for the consumers. So that'll be another area that we'll be pushing on pretty hard.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about the alliance that you've pulled together is that when you have brought them from all different services, platforms, in order to.
Well, and I want to give some credit to the Googles and Facebooks of the world, because they have, while they get a lot of heat, they also have stepped up to take a lot of action. They know they're not where they need to be,
Right.
but they are working together collectively to ensure that we make changes here, and that's what we need. And that's, I think, probably one of the biggest changes over the course of the last few years, is that you really now have everybody coming together, figuring out what do we need to do. It's really absolutely imperative as we go forward, because if we have AI, AR, VR, 5G, all those other things coming, and we don't see around corners, imagine what could happen.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an area where this alliance is going to have to be taking a hard look at what we need to do to make sure that we have a responsible media supply chain in the future.
And how do you put some heft to that? How do you put some teeth into the actual behaviors that you're going to see? Like what you have in the past made changes to your spend according to how you thought.
Well,
platforms were.
a lot of the stuff will come down to what David said at the beginning, is economics. I mean, we've been known to go off of platforms before because we didn't like where our ads were showing up, and it's why we still are a heavy TV. We like places where the content is controlled, where the comments are controlled, where you know exactly where your ad's going to be placed. So those kinds of standards are why we still have a pretty big business there. So
I really think it goes back to reminding our teams, developers, partners, and ask them the question who we serve.
yeah,
Because there are situations that you get confronted with. Is it right? Often versus easy, and the easy sometimes comes with more money. And we're all running businesses, we're aware of that. But I think in terms of safety and transparency, the contemplation of risk is much more important today than rushing to the what makes more money or what is easy. And I think it's the constant question or through line is remembering who you're serving. And I think it's a very sobering question to ask, because when you have to put the face on that consumer and know when you are doing the right thing, there's plenty of data that proves that your business models are going to be just fine, and I would argue supports the longevity or sustainability of your company.
But I think that one heft is big advertisers choosing. The other is why we focus on the metrics, getting the currency to stand for quality that the industry will agree behind also helps make sure the money go in the right place. Because it shouldn't just be the big guys that drive this. The whole industry should accept these are accepted standards. So it is why we're trying to pull people together.
And when trust and transparency is obviously, that's going to be a huge hurdle to get over, not just how consumers trust media, again, but how you as an industry can all, and different companies and different, sectors within those companies and industries, how you all trust each other. Are there, what do you see as opportunities to work together better? Like, what is the next phase of that?
I think first of all, content quality, editorial comment moderation, cross-platform transparency, but also privacy. We've had many conversations with every one of our partners about how do we come up with a way in which we can have a common way where we can ask consumers for permission for a particular set of data, whether we ask it as our company or a platform asks it, and then tell them what benefit we're going to provide them, and then say, okay, if you get this, we ask this data, we won't serve you annoying ads. If we do this, we'll give you interest-based. If we give this, we'll give you an extra ad or immersion into education.
Well, and Mark, this is why people like panels.
What's that?
The panels are still valuable because it's the one thing you opt into. I mean, the Nielsen panelists let us watch everything, but they know it can't be used to target. And I think you need panels to correct, because I think the fifth one beyond is inclusion.
Yeah.
I think it's essential. Media does drive culture. I think it being essential that all media serves all people and that all people are seen and all people are heard is critical. And there's a lot we have to do to make that right. Big data can course correct to things that don't let you see everyone. It's always important that we have inclusion. Yep.
And when you look at the opportunities of working together, what strategic priorities look like, what does success look like for you when you look at the future of media? What is, how are we working together for a better future for the future of media?
Well, I certainly start with quality metrics, which is, are consumers entertained, and do they have news they can count on to make to make decisions? And the news part of this is really important to have right. We need an educated, well-informed, fact-based population. And I think that quality that's truly inclusive, that everybody feels they're getting what they need and they're using their time wisely is essential.
I think ultimately, particularly for our company, what we're building towards is a fully open, transparent platform that you ultimately can trade automatically, because automation hasn't come certainly to the linear content publishers in the US, and it's something that we have our foot on the gas and investing. So if you just look at our company, we're over $20 billion of content investment in 2020 alone, and well over $10 billion of investment in technology. So the whole goal is there to bring those two things at an intersection point where we can offer you a mechanism to trade easily and openly with full transparency, that you know what content you're getting, where your ad is running, and then we'll be able to be fully accountable to what customers we were able to serve you. So that's really what success looks like for us, and while it might not be in 2020, I would imagine that there would be a really tremendous amount of accelerated progress over the next 2 to 3 years.
The automation in advertising has largely been programmatic, which has been lower value, lower cost things. I think what you're doing is doing what the stock market did, right? Which is, we got rid of stockbrokers a long time ago, and you can trade really expensive things on the stock exchange automatically with exchanges. And so I think all of us are trying to actually get the quality bar and the automation hurdle to cross with each other. So you can trade quality, not just trade unseen, unmeasured, long tail stuff.
Yeah, I think success for us looks like really a irresistibly superior consumer experience when it comes to media, entertainment, and culture, whether it be associated with a platform, a media company, or a brand. And that's media, entertainment, culture have always come together to make people feel good, get great stories, get information, shop, buy products. That's what we're seeking. We're seeking an ecosystem that enables all of us to be able to create that kind of experience. If that happens, that will truly be leading constructive disruption because that will increase the value of media and the value of brands, and all boats will rise.
And what would you say, you're each representing brands that have had names in, the market for many years. You obviously have a lot of lessons learned, and particularly, Linda, we talked about the fact that it may have been that NBC stands for traditional media, but now is no longer. But you also have that benefit over some of the new incoming companies that you have the history behind you to be able to kind of lead.
Yeah, I think we're over the period of time where the industry was experiencing a lot of fear and trepidation about the disruption and the shiny new toy syndrome of the ease of which new companies or new platforms could transact. Again, I go back to the value trade-off in terms of content. So we began to embrace our history and legacy and say, these are all the good that came with being a legacy media, and a lot of that comes with, consumer confidence and full transparency and feelings on open marketplaces. So we're embracing that and bringing that along with our development or investment in technology to get that superior consumer experience that, quite frankly, we got really wrong in live linear in the US. We took advantage of it. We didn't respect the relationship of the consumer experience. So now we have a really big opportunity as content and technology are intersecting to fix what's happening on live linear, but certainly get it right in our new apps and our OTT platforms. We're excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
What I will say is one of the things that we're seeing is, in order to make it work, always go back to what the consumer wants. We can see a world without ads as we know them today.
I cannot see that.
You
No?
can.
There we go.
I said world without ads,
Same.
comma, as we know them today.
As we know them today.
As we know them today. We'll figure out a way to make that happen. But a lot of times now what's happening is we're embedding technologies into our everyday products.
Right.
So when you embed technology in an everyday product, that actually provides this information. It's very, very useful. Now, if we can figure out a way for NBCU platform Peacock to be able to show while you're brushing your teeth a nice little show, we'll make that work. But the idea is
Oh, real quick. She's taking notes.
figure out a way to do that. But that's technology's changing so many different things. And again, we've barely even scratched the surface on things like augmented reality and virtual reality.
Yeah. And of those things, are you doing experiments in those areas?
Lots of experiments. And stay tuned. We're going to have a whole bunch of other things, too. I don't know if you've seen some of the interactive technology that's come up, too. So there's a lot of things that I think are going to create things which actually you can do on any platform. So very exciting.
Yeah. And in your role, David?
I think the longevity so we started, the first Nielsen products was 95 years ago for Procter & Gamble to measure market share, to know where to put the TV ads. And like Mark said, wherever they went, we went. That's how we got in the radio business. That's how we got in the TV business. That's how we got in the digital business for the advertiser to solve it, to serve the consumer. I think all of this is about always putting the consumer first, realizing the business model may have to be sacrificed because consumers adopted something new. And I think the right disruptors follow the consumer faster and are willing to let go of the old model faster. So for us, we just have to make sure that transparency is there so that the buyer and seller can transact in the new way. But the consumer is going to lead us home. And I keep coming back to inclusive. The risk is to make sure you're following all the consumers, or we'll end up with an elite problem in media and culture, which will not help the world.
And if you look at the collaboration and the way that you're working together now, which all three of you have said you have many projects you work together on, and you're the incumbents and those that are coming into the market, how are you going to convince them that putting consumers first is the most important thing, but putting them first in the way that you know to put them first, and maybe look away from algorithms, look towards more curation, create quality content? How do you think you're going to get them to join the party?
Well, I think it's happening. What Mark said is, Facebook and Google have really leaned into some of these changes in a big way. Interesting enough, I would say equally, the television industry has moved to the same middle to say we're not going to defend measuring only broadcast. We're going to measure all video. So I would say there's a coalescing around consumer, and it's in everybody's DNA. You just have to be pushed on it.
Yeah, I think the marketplace really has moved from an us versus them to more of a we achieve success together as we. So it's not, kind of linear or digital or old company, new company, and we're all in our corners. We just know in order to reach as many consumers and invest in our own brand health, they don't differentiate by screen or platform, so you need to figure out a way to be in business together. So I think that's really what's happened, and fueled by, efforts of global marketers and accountability efforts here has really pushed us together, to enable us to work together.
It's one of the areas I think that the World Economic Forum can help. And because we're pleased that you're supporting the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, because those are the kinds of things that if we can get these standards on content, on comments, on privacy, on data transparency, then we can compete on the basis of innovation and creativity.
Right.
That's where the competition needs to be.
Great.
It shouldn't be on who can hoard the most data. It couldn't be on who can monetize the most content. It needs to be on common standards about how we operate, and then what we can do is compete on the basis of innovation and creativity. That's what's going to ultimately drive the marketplace and drive market growth.
And I think one of the things we need to do is make sure that technology can work for nations of all size.
Right.
So the big nations have the resources across the players to do it, but as we build those tools, they are being built globally.
Yeah.
We've got to let the structure, a lot of smaller countries, the governments have a lot of role to play with media still. We've got to make it easier to make this really work worldwide,
Right.
and not forget any nation.
Great. So I think, thanks for that. And I think, to sum up what we've heard here today, when you think about innovation, and I think, I've heard you say this before, Linda, that, the best innovation comes from collaboration. And, we've seen some great examples of it here today with how your three companies in particular do work together and come up with those, unique innovations that serve the customer, that serve the consumer and the client. And whether your client is your internal businesses or whether it is the actual consumer who is engaging with your content, putting them first has been incredibly important. And that collaboration, whether it's being able to cross platforms, whether it's crossing geographies, it seems to be that that's key moving forward. And we're happy at WEF. That is our reason for being. We bring together folks in order to make sure that we have these opportunities for these conversations. The collaborations that are existing are fantastic. We hope to expand them to be even more because we're not just building widgets here. Media tells stories and media influences in a pretty meaningful way. And the opportunities that we have to make sure that that content is good quality and positive and rises above all the others is something that we think is important too. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us here today, and thank you all.
Thank you.